upcoming community engagement table. It's going to be December 18th, so in about a week or so.
Next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday. And what North Point Conference Center at 1256 Penn Avenue North. It'll be from 4 to 8 p.m. and parking is available, easy to get to, and you want to be there just to make sure that you're attuned to the development in our community. So my guests now are, to my immediate right, Devin Nolan. She's the Community Engagement Coordinator at Pillsbury United Communities. And with Devin Nolan is Eric Hansen, who's Director of Economic Policy and Development for the City of Minneapolis, the Planning and Economic Development Department. Guys, thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
You know, so the best thing to do is to sort of do a Upper Harbor Terminal 101. Let's give the background. Eric, let me have you jump in.
Right. Sure. Thank you, Mr. McFarland, for being here.
And thank you for being here, first of all.
Right. It's a pleasure to talk about the Upper Harbor Terminal. This is a unique site, not only in North Minneapolis, in the city, the region, but also in the nation. It's a 48-acre site that was once a barging terminal for the city that was no longer needed once they closed the lock-in dams at St. Anthony Falls. It has been a property that we've been looking to redevelop and started the planning actually back in the 1990s. So it's been on the list of things that we need to do. For some of you out there, you've been participated in the Above the Falls planning. This is one of the major sites identified in that plan. And at the root of that plan is returning the river and the access to the river to the community. That's along the river, both on the east side and the west side, so northeast and North Minneapolis, and down from the city limits down to the central riverfront in downtown. We've been working with the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board over the last 25 years to recreate that access, and this offers kind of a once-in-a-generation opportunity for us to return the river to a 1 mile length of riverfront to the city. So that's at to the residents of the neighborhood. So that's at the root of the development. It's out of the 48 acres, we're setting aside approximately 20 acres for parkland. And the access to this site mainly comes off of Dowling Avenue. There are some impediments to access of the river. So what the plan has is identified a large park at the intersection of the river and Dowling Avenue. The Minneapolis Park Board is working on the planning for that, and we're working in conjunction with the Park Board and their community process around the planning. Upland from the river.
Let me ask you before you go further. So what's the Park Board stake in this? How does the Park Board become a partner with the city? Who actually owns the property?
Right now, the property is owned entirely by the city, but we work collaboratively with the Minneapolis Park Board on a number of projects. The Park Board, as many of you know, owns all of the parkland within the city. They actually own some parkland outside of the city. They're an independent body, but we're kind of like close cousins, and so we work very closely together. When we went out to do the actual development of this project, we did it in conjunction with the Minneapolis Park Board. So the development team that we've selected together. The process has been done in collaboration, and the vision is to advance that Above the Falls plan is for them to plan the park, and then the city would dedicate that land to the park, and then when it's built, that land will be owned by the Park Board.
So let me ask you why the Park Board, why they were a natural partner and ally, and is there a history of strategic engagement like this, a cooperation between the city and the Park Board? And I raised the question just to get a baseline picture. And if the Park Board, for example, wasn't involved, how might a development like this proceed?
Well, we've had our histories are intertwined, especially along the river. The Mississippi River in most places is the birthplace of the industrial age of the city. has been a working river, and we have been working since the late 1970s, early 1980s to reclaim that for community use. And it was not a question of who we would work with. The park board is the entity that we go to bring parkland to the city and the citizens and community members of Minneapolis, and so we didn't think about other entities to do so. So we've been working on that mainly in the central riverfront. So if you've been down to the Stone Arch Bridge or Boom Island, that's work that the city has been engaging with the park board for decades. That work has started to go up the river, and you've seen some of that occur either independently by the park board or in collaboration between the city and the park board.
Is there a federal role in as much as the river is a multi-state or interstate venue? And we have at the Stone Arch Bridge the Army Corps of Engineers in position. So I'm assuming that there is some relationship with the feds, or is there not?
Yeah, the river is a national recreation area, and the National Park Services oversees that. So we coordinate with the park services, and then there's some restrictions of use based on the fact that we're in that MNRA. So there is a partnership that we have with the federal government through MNRA. There is the Corps of Engineers, which owns the lock and dams. That's outside of the Upper Harbor project, but we're working with them about the disposition of that lock. That'll be coming up sometime in the near to distant future, depending on Congress, the United States Congress. So we work with the National Park Service. Right now, they're been more of advisory, and we've been consulting with them, not in an active role in the development. But there's a critical area that's in city ordinance that kind of helps dictate heights and some other things around development, and that comes out of the MNRA, which is the Mississippi Regional Riverway.
Okay. So I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Okay. So I just wanted to start with the river, because that's the reason we've been working on this part of the city for so long, is so that to forward that vision of Minneapolis where public waterfronts are public, and that's been part of the calling card of Minneapolis since the city started, and we're just trying to be as equitable as we can to return all of the public water to the public. So upland from the park is a development, and this, as I said, the park board and the city went out for a development team. What was called a request for qualifications in late 2016. And we got a proposal back in 2017 and selected a development team of United Properties, First Avenue Productions, and Thor Companies. And from there, we've been working on a process with the community about what we should put, like where's the park, and what other developments could complement that park. And there were a number of conditions that we would want to meet, and values in that work. Some of the things we've heard from the community are about having some destinations, and at the core of that is an outdoor music performance venue. But there's also interest in having housing that's available to Northsiders and jobs. Those are at the current point where we're at, is those are the two prevailing topic or issues that we're trying to work towards. The other part is around belonging and ownership. It is very important that we explore, and we've gotten direction from the city council about who ultimately owns this property, and that's in a number of ways. That's ownership comes down to who owns the land and who owns the buildings, but also do you feel like you belong? And the way we look at this project with the number of housing units and commercial stalls and business opportunities and parkland is, how is this an extension of the McKinley neighborhood? It's connected, it's in the McKinley neighborhood, but because of I-94 kind of divides it from the river. We want to make sure that we're very mindful of how that's connected to folks that live in that neighborhood. Then how is it supporting the greater north side? Because ultimately that is the kind of the first tiers of the community that they're going to benefit the most from it, or be impacted the most by it, depending on the way we go about it. Then we go look at the citywide and region and maybe nationally. Is this a development project that we can be proud of around the country?
Devon, you are helping develop this community engagement strategy so that people in the neighborhood and people who are stakeholders in this, you mentioned United Properties, you mentioned the Park Board, you mentioned First Avenue and neighborhoods like McKinley. And so one of the things that you're doing is creating a venue, an event, a series of learning tables, you call them, so that people can learn about and that you kind of manage getting a common vision, a shared vision of opportunity. Talk about the learning table, first of all, in particular, what you've done so far, and why you are doing it, number one, and then I'll have some more questions that build on that.
Sure.
So, but thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. So it's our sixth learning table. So we've had some opportunity to really hear from the community. We've had various topics from housing to housing kind of 101 to a deeper dive on housing, conversations around community ownership and what does that look like, all the way to where this topic on December 18th will be a design charrette for the various land uses and what the community benefits are. And so oftentimes when we talk about community benefits, the first thing we go to is a community benefits agreement, right? That's common to be a part of a development process. What we've been talking very candidly about at our core team meetings is how to solidify what could come through a community benefits agreement by having community benefits embedded in each of the land uses in tandem with an actual community benefits agreement. And so to your point, Mr. McFarland, why we're doing this is we know that the average community member on the north side, and I've been here my whole life, so I've been this person, oftentimes we're reacting once the brick and mortar starts to go down. We don't know that there are 5, 6, 7, 10 years of work that went into getting to that point. And at that point, it's kind of too late to get our demands met and included in the process. And so we've been thinking strategically, how do we use what we're learning through this Upper Harbor Terminal project to assist the city in learning how to do development differently, so that it's not just about Upper Harbor Terminal, but it's about changing the way we do development throughout the city of Minneapolis. And so for me, thinking about, I have this dream of developing a council of Northside residents. We have architects, we have planners, we have folks who are from here and live here. We have engineers who have this piece that, in my opinion, everything should be vetted through them. It doesn't exist yet, and we'll keep dreaming, but it's really about, we want to continue to resist and challenge these systems of oppression that have oppressed us for many, many years. But like we were talking about earlier, we have to have an inside-outside game. We have to have a parallel track. The trick is we get so caught in fighting the powers that be that we never build a base for ourselves. And it's very traumatic for Black folks. I can only speak on behalf of Black folks. When we see other people groups who are able to build economic basis for themselves throughout our city, and here we are resisting, right? And so how do we do both? And that's what a lot of the conversations around the learning table have been. Of course, there are dissenting voices along the entire spectrum of folks who are saying this should not happen, we should protect the river, we should not develop on the river, all the way to the folks who are ready to start laying bricks and go to a show at the amphitheater and everything in between. And so what I say, I get the wonderful pleasure of facilitating all of that and saying, when we're in the room together, we get to hear firsthand what our neighbors are saying. And it makes me think about the conversation about the parks, where we literally had a comment that the park should be bigger, right? And then the very next comment was the park should be smaller.
20 acres is too much.
Yeah, 20 acres too. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you have these dissenting opinions about what should be happening there. And it's a matter of how do we get to consensus and how do we learn to compromise, knowing that it's really about the greater good. It's about the greater good of what will benefit the collective. So I don't get to bring my ego, right? I get to bring my personal interest, and I get to build relationships with folks who I otherwise may not have had an opportunity to. But we get into the weeds, and then we get back to work.
Eric, take a minute and sort of paint a picture, if you would, craft a vision of what this new development might look like when it's done. Sort of describe the park that you see in your mind's eye, and describe the entertainment venue, and describe the housing, and kind of how this whole thing circulates, how these things relate to each other, and how they relate to the emerging and evolving definition of North Minneapolis.
Right.
I have to say that when I heard you present about this, a couple of months ago, maybe further back than that, you used language that I was quite impressed with. You called this project, and I think you were speaking on behalf of the mayor's office and on behalf of city council, or certainly on behalf of planning, you called this an equity project. And so I hadn't heard that language before in city government, and so it intrigued me. And I want to invite you to talk about where the question of equity comes into both the outcome, the vision, and the process. And is that real? Is it lip service? I can tell you that there is a healthy dose of skepticism, and skepticism is earned because of the history of promises and failures to deliver on promises, and the history of kicking the ball, the can down the road, and history of referring it to committee and referring it to studies. In the meantime, we keep losing territory, ground, and opportunity. But you talked about this as a definitive strategy, and so I want you to say that and talk about what you meant.
Okay.
With the vision, first of all, draw the picture in your mind.
All right. Thank you. That's a lot. So I wrote a few notes. So if I miss to answer one of your questions, please let me know that I missed it. First, I want to say is there's a ton of information on the project's website, and that's upperharbormpls.com if anybody wants to go see it, and that's where the approved concept plan resides. And in that plan, there's been a lot of work with we have a 17-member, and there's a few open seats, but that's the full complement of a collaborative planning committee. And that's the first step, one of the first steps around making sure that it's equitable. We heard in the development of the concept plan to have people who are impacted the most be at the table to help with the decisions. That's why it's very valuable for us to work with Devon and the Pillsbury United team around these learning tables, and to engage community that are going to be impacted because they live next door, or they have not been able to participate fully in the process in the past. And so in this collaborative planning committee, we designed it with the city council's guidance so that it is intentionally advantaging people that haven't typically been on these committees. And so we see what I hope is a reflective of the Northside community and some Northeast, but mostly Northside communities, a lot of black folks from the community bringing that voice, and that's been very valuable in the process, because when you talk about equitable development and you talk about equitable results, it's who's helping making the decision is the first thing I think about, and then who benefits from those decisions, and how do you measure that when you're all done, right? So being mindful of that. So the city, when it approved its concept plan back in March, it put a number of directions on our work. One, to look at how is this going to be community owned, and to your lip service question, I agree. We do not have a great track record of delivering on promises. I have come to this work, I've been in this work for nearly 20 years. I try to be as authentically honest as I can, sometimes in uncomfortable ways, because I will not tell people something I can't deliver. And if it's off the table, I'll be honest with you if it's off the table. And I'm also a believer that we shouldn't be doing something just to do it and check it off the box. So when we look at, community ownership, for example, how are we looking at the technical aspect of community ownership? How are we getting to the details of, at the end of the day, someone has to show up and sign a contract to purchase land. And what is that entity and how does that work to get to that level, as opposed to just, we should have the community own it, it's a good idea, and then we're done with the conversation. Because that tends to get into the behind the scenes or the black box or whatever, of where, we thought we're doing this and then it comes out the other way, a different thing, and then we can explain it away, and like Devon was saying, the bricks are going up and the benefits weren't there, and there's a lot of promises that weren't kept. So I'm a believer in the Martin Sabo approach, which is under promise and over deliver, but try and be as honest as possible. So what is at the core of this project, and what do I see? And I see is we had a concept that has some elements, and those elements are around housing and office and parkland and business opportunity, and this kind of yet to be determined hub of food or community-based businesses, some sort of incubator, accelerator of some sort, and then the music venue. And what I initially see is, as you come over the hill on Dowling Avenue and down towards the river, that you feel like this is for you, whoever that is, right? And those are who is most likely to come there, and you feel like you are connected. And that's a really arduous journey between Lyndale Avenue to the river right now. And so can you see the future? And at that center, because that's kind of the center of the development right now, when you get to the river, do you feel like you belong and you're kind of part of your home? So design really matters in that case, and how those interact, the different development, how many housing units and where they are, that'll all be coming out with the community. And so we've made some changes to the concept plan based on the community input, but I'm just hopeful that when there was a committee member a few weeks ago, is you want to feel good when you're there. And I think that's what I hope to see, and that people, and then we're very good at in redevelopment in the government, and my job is at the root. The public purpose of my job is to grow and support the tax base. And historically, that approach to economic development, because it's hard to tell you what it is, but if it's about the tax base, that relationship is with buildings, because real estate value is the tax base. And historically, this profession has been a relationship with buildings. I like to flip that around and have a relationship with people, right? And if we empower people and we remove barriers for people, we will get the tax base that we need, because they'll make investments, they'll move up those kind of hierarchy of needs and take risks, and we'll get the value we need. And so that's what I see, is that we're very good. And if you, I just like to tell a lot of people I work in, look at the promotional photos we take. We'll take a picture of a building. You won't see any people there. I want to see, people from the McKinley neighborhood know that that's the place they can go, and the North Side. And I want to see North Siders at that place. And so I'll know that's what I see is North Side kids run around in the park, and people come into the music venue that live in the neighborhood, but also something we can be proud of as a city and a region.
I'm Al McFarland. This is the front room session at the Marcus Garvey House. Marcus Garvey House is the home of Insight News in North Minneapolis, and one of our regular live to Facebook and live to the web webcast. My guests are Eric Hansen, who is Director of Economic Policy and Development for the City of Minneapolis, the Planning and Economic Development Department, and Devon Nolan, who's Community Engagement Coordinator for Pillsbury United Communities. Today we're talking about an important meeting, an important event, an important change for our community, and it's the development of the Upper Harbor Terminal. Devon is leading the Community Engagement Learning Table. It's the 6th in the series, and those will continue. But the objective of the Learning Table is to invite you into a space and a time where you can raise questions, share your vision, challenge assumptions, and make sure you leave feeling that you have a clear picture of what's going to be happening to change our neighborhood, and that your voice is one of the voices that mattered in the development of our community. You know, this notion of walking over the hill and feeling like you belong there, that's really important. Let me tell you why I have the experience. I've said this on this show before, but this brings it in focus again. When I first came to Twin Cities, my brother and I lived in St. Paul. We're trying to find an address in North Minneapolis, and probably my first time on Plymouth Avenue. And we didn't know where we were going, so we drove all the way past Penn, you know, Thomas, Upton, and around the curve, and we saw the chalet. I can tell you this, I'm from Kansas City, Missouri. I lived in the middle of the black community in Kansas City, and the only time I ever saw a place like the chalet was when I went to pick up my aunt who worked for white people in the suburban Kansas City, in suburban communities, where you see grand buildings like that. So my immediate thought is that I've crossed out of a safe zone, what I thought was a black community, and that my life might be in danger if I'm in a place and don't have a reason for being there. And so that may not seem real to you, but I tell you, I remember the experience today that, and I say that's an experience that all of us, as I believe black people have, of being acutely aware of the place and acutely aware of consequence in ways that we shouldn't have to be, of consequence based on the power arrangements, based on the racial environment, white supremacist structure that could mean personal physical harm to us. And if it didn't mean personal harm, what I felt was a reflection of the psychic, the harm to my psyche, to my spirit. So to hear you say that is the right thing. And Devon, how do the community engagement learning tables uncover that, explore what it is? You mentioned that there is this propensity to be in a fight mode because we resist those experiences. Experiences make us resist engagements that bring that history back, but there's also a need to do more. So build on what I just said. When I speak this, what comes to your mind?
I have those same experiences throughout the city of Minneapolis.
Even today.
It's even today. This sense of place. We unfortunately have a tremendous lack of public space in North Minneapolis in particular. And you see people convening in places that we don't necessarily want them to convene because there's no place for them to convene. I have found myself, since I've got more deeply involved in this project, I find myself being drawn to the river because I have had the experience of learning some of the history and what some of the vision is. It has become a place of solace for me. Prior to having these experiences, I didn't spend a lot of time on the river. It didn't feel like it was a place for me. But I go there because I want to see what kind of other people are there. Very seldom do I see black folks. But I see other people who live in the city experiencing the river in a very wonderful and magical way. You know, throughout the summer, even in the winter, you'll still see people spending time on the river. And what I've been reminded of is that the river is sacred. It is alive. It is something that we are all connected to. We are at the beginning of the Mississippi River, and it goes all the way down to New Orleans, right? And so I remember a quote from, I believe it was the mayor of New Orleans, who said that what starts as a twig at this point of the river is a torpedo by the time it hits New Orleans. And so for me, it just creates this great sense of responsibility for us to get this right, because it doesn't just impact North Minneapolis, it doesn't just impact the city of Minneapolis, it impacts our entire nation. And there's work to be done there. I think that what I've seen in the vision is something that will shift the way that we black folks experience our city if we do this right, when we do this right. I have heard some very well-intentioned folks set out a vision that isn't realistic. And how do we take this time, use the space of the learning table to do a couple of things. It's really, we call it a learning table because we want to provide this learning water. It's an opportunity for us to build our capacity to understand how development works, how decisions are made, why those decisions are made, why these timelines are set. It's also an opportunity for us to find places where we can, what I would describe as a loophole, where there's opportunities for us to push back and win. I got involved in this project because I work with a lot of freedom fighters, right? Like Mr. McFarland, and I can list names of folks who've been doing this for 40 years. I'm not doing this for 40 years. If we do it right, that fight looks a little different, right? And I don't want to just fight, I want to win. And winning for me looks like it's beyond us having jobs at the Upper Harbor Terminal where we're perpetuating those same systems of dependence. The difference is between working for someone and having your business housed there. It's the difference between having the developers at the table, having the owners of the music venue all at the table together, hearing from the community about what our needs are, and immediately going into solution. How can we make this work? And we've seen that happen over and over and over, where they've been responsive to what the community has said, trying to figure out, saying, I don't know when they don't know, but I'll find out, or how can we figure out how to work together? This notion of collaborating is sometimes difficult for us because that means we're going to have to compromise a little bit. We all bring our personal interests to the table, and I'm a parent. I have 4 children who I would love for my children to be able to stay in North Minneapolis, to become homeowners in North Minneapolis. However, if the trajectory of what this city means for Black folks doesn't change, that probably won't happen. Not that the Upper Harbor Terminal is the impetus of fixing all the social ills that we have in Minneapolis for Black folks, but it's an opportunity. I talk very candidly about the fact that there's a long history of divestment and disinvestment and unfulfilled promises, but we can't get stuck there. We have to pull ourselves out of that, despite being subject to what Elder Mahmoud El-Khati has coined as the misery index. So anytime you're doing anything Black, it's harder, right? So it's what you described earlier as having the genius to do it, but not always the training. And so how do we begin to create a space where we can learn together, we can create a shared approach, we can coordinate efforts? Because when I'm out in the community, talking to people about this project, I would say 85% of the people that I encounter are aware of it. A good portion of those folks are engaged from behind the scenes and watching to see what's happening. A good portion of those folks were engaged very early on and then disengaged because they didn't know the direction that the project is going. And so we've been working really hard to re-engage those folks, but also the average community member in North Minneapolis may not know about this project and are going to be the folks who are most heavily impacted by it. The reality of it is, every table that we're at, we're trying to engage the community. We're asking the community to come to us. When we formatted this, we were working hard to be in alignment with the city's coordinated plan and the timeline that had been set. And we'll talk a little bit about timeline, but those benchmarks along to move the project forward, we worked really hard to align with that so that we could harvest the community voice and opinions about what we want to see happen. And I mean, we've heard everything, Mr. McFarland, from the pie in the sky to the most basic things about having water available, And so how do we synthesize that in a point? I'm also a developer, so I understand how performers work. I understand what it means to get, money from HUD or different types of subsidies in order to make this project work. And those are things that it's just not common knowledge in our community. And so how do we continue to cultivate that understanding, and at the same time, capture this opportunity to, as I said earlier, help teach the city how to do development differently, and capitalize on the resources that we have now. We have, from my own experience, folks in the city who are employees of the city who are helping us figure out how to navigate these things from the inside. I don't know that we've been at that point in the recent history where we have champions who are saying, this is what's happening. This is where you have an opportunity.
And watchdogs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We got both.
Yeah, right, yeah. And it's critical.
Yes.
Because in the past, if you weren't there, if you weren't at the table, you were on
On
the
the
table.
table.
Right?
That's
You
right.
were being served.
That's right.
And not in the way that you, that you like. You were the meal.
That's
You
right.
were- Yeah.
That's right.
So how big is this project? What are the numbers? As you, as a developer, what's this project going to cost everybody involved in it, from United to First Avenue to the Park Board to the City of Minneapolis to maybe money that you're going to have to get from the state or from Metro Council, from Transit? I'm sure there are many, many intricate, integrated parts that have to come together for this thing to really materialize.
Well,
That's the fun part.
that's the fun part, right? So not only is this a tremendous opportunity, and, you know, it has a lot of extra, like, unconventional, required. I think what we're seeing is the evolution of the development process that Devon was talking about. Even how we initiate projects, I think, will change
Sure.
because of what we were learning on Upper Harbor Terminal, and honestly, we're learning a lot more about engagement with the community and community voice that's translating into other things that are happening off the site from the learning tables. They've been very, very useful for us to build some relationships. The cost of the development is going to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And
Low
it's,
hundreds, mid hundreds, high
well,
hundreds.
so I hate to be
I mean,
held to a number, but it's
yeah.
going to be, I would say it's north of 200 million when it's all built out.
Okay, okay.
This is something the city of Minneapolis has not done.
How does it compare to what happened at Holman?
Right. That's what I was about to say. It's
That
not
was
done
the-
since we did Heritage Park,
Yeah.
where we have to build. Heritage Park was in a little bit of a different situation because there were some infrastructure in place. There is none in this area, so we have to build all the water lines.
Which is a
and
good
this-
thing, because you can create
The campus.
modern and
Right.
technology.
Right.
Green.
Yeah,
Right,
and
green, modern
Yeah,
green, yeah,
right.
so we're gonna be, we have to put in all the sewers and all of the, the water lines and the roads and the streets and curbs, gutters, electrical services, all of those things have to go in to this area. This is also an area that, while it's 48 acres, it's a very narrow site, and so can you fit a conventional building where you need to, with also having the buffer of the park and the access to the
Are
river?
there cleanup issues, soil cleanup issues?
So we never say for sure, because we never know until you start moving things. But our initial review of the ground is it's in pretty good shape.
Okay.
We've owned it for a number of decades as a city and operated as the barging terminal, and so
Who owned it before? I mean, was it always owned by the city?
I don't know who owned it before, but
Okay.
it's been 50 more years since we've owned it. I believe we bought it in the 40s and started the barge in the 60s.
Okay, and so it was, you managed barge traffic?
Right.
The city managed
Right.
barge traffic. How did
Yeah.
that work? I mean, tell me about that, because
So-
History school.
I've driven up
Yeah.
there a few times, just driving around. It's a fun
So-
place to drive.
So the Upper Harbor,
Yeah.
if the documents that I've read are accurate, because I was not there, predates me in my time with the city, was purchased as a way to ensure commercial navigation on the river. So it is the furthest point north of commercial navigation on the Mississippi River, and therefore, because it required the Corps of Engineers to basically dredge the river so that you could have barges come up and down, and it was a way to protect the industries that were on the river and protect the jobs that were on the river. The barge terminal, and then give a rationale for the lock and dams, both the upper and lower St. Anthony locks. And because we're competitive with our neighbor to the east, have some commercial navigation, and we're just stop in St. Paul. I mean, that's way back when.
The river comes through St. Paul first, then is
Right,
that it?
right. So in order for us to
You wanted
keep-
to make sure that
we-
everything didn't stop there.
Right, right.
And all business and development stopped in St. Paul.
right.
and-
Just remember, people are involved in decision making.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
like to be competitive.
Sure,
So that's
sure.
how we are. And so the operations of the terminal was basically commodities exchange. So commodities that were coming in and out of the region. So if you needed something that large quantity of grain or sand or coal at some point, I don't know if it might have coal, but something that could go that has a lot of it, and it needs to be transported in a slow time frame. That was the exchange at the Upper Harbor Terminal. So there was storage of that material. There was an exchange. There's a rail line that serves that terminal. There's the barging that operations, and then a lot of truck traffic. So
Stuff that was going elsewhere from here could be brought there,
Right.
stored, and then loaded on the barges and then sent down the river.
right.
And so when you see fewer of them now, but, used to see a lot of barges loaded, it seemed to me mostly with sand and rock and gravel, but I'm imagining that in previous years, things like, wheat, would have been
right.
a major commodity, and maybe others as well, I don't know.
Most of my understanding of the products that went in and out of there is anecdotal from just seeing it from my own eyes. But the larger user of the lock and dams was Semstone, which is just to the south of this facility. So you used to see a bunch of barges, but once they closed the locks, it was really hard for us to move things up and down the river. So that's what the Upper Harbor, and it's Upper Harbor because there was a Lower Harbor, it's now called Bohemian Flats Park, which is underneath the Washington Avenue Bridge that bisects the University of Minnesota.
Sure.
So that's where the name comes from. Okay. And so in the future, we might have a different name for it, but that's the kind of the working name for it.
Okay.
Terminal is kind of it is not optimistic. It's the end of the line.
Yeah, terminal,
Yes.
right, Upper Harbor Terminal. So how can people make money? How can people, Devon, change their lives? How can our black community, I'm a resident here, you're a resident here, you used to be a resident in North Minneapolis, but how can the residents of North Minneapolis in general, how can black people in particular, and people of color in general, position themselves to contribute to and make money from this development? How do businesses grow because of this development? What's the answer?
Yeah, I think it's what we talked about earlier, where it's really about cultivating the assets that we already have, right? So oftentimes when you hear about North Minneapolis, all you hear about is our deficits. Those of us who live here know that we have many wonderful assets that get missed. And so I would challenge the community as a whole to change the way we speak about ourselves first. There's a level of what you might call a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So if we continue to perpetuate those same cycles of speaking negatively about, that's what we get.
Yeah.
And so I would say, think, be creative, which we're really good at doing. Think about your business, and is this a business that could meet the demand of the end users for this development? So when I have worked with lots of small businesses throughout the city of Minneapolis, and so when I think about the types of businesses that could go there, oftentimes they're intimidated by the process, right? So to Eric's point of there will likely be processes that will change out of what we're hearing from the community. It's intimidating to respond to an RFP. I don't know how to write a 55-page proposal, right? This is what I hear in community. And so how do we begin to cultivate some of the resources that we have, the CDC organizations that are doing the community development, to take the existing assets, the existing businesses, and say, here's an opportunity. If you could dream big, how could you make this work for you? But there's also some components where you think about the different land uses with the music venue and the parks, and there'll be job opportunities with those parts of the development as well. You think about the team of engineers, right, that'll be needed. You think about the dump trucks that are going to have to haul dirt. If you think about, the gentleman I met just today who actually works for Public Works, the city of Minneapolis, contracted carpenter, black guy, lives on the north side. And so there are, unlimited opportunities in the way I think about it. I think the biggest work will be helping the community understand what the opportunity is and how to navigate the current systems, because with the timeline that we have, we won't necessarily change the systems as they are now. There are some things that we can change along the way. But for instance, being able to respond to a request for proposals, being able to make sure your business has insurance and all the requirements that are necessary to even respond. Having those conversations in community, knowing that we might be a couple years down the line. I know we'll talk about timeline before things start to get built. What does it look like for us to cultivate that now? Taking a pool of what are the existing businesses that we have. I had a wonderful opportunity of meeting a woman at the entrepreneur kickoff that happened a couple of weeks ago, and her father is he does fishery, right? He wants to put I probably shouldn't share her idea, but he has an idea that he wants to explore here in North Minneapolis. And had we not created a space for them to come and connect with the developers directly, with the development team directly, that opportunity might have gotten missed. And so to your question, Mr. McFarland, I'm going to push back in the way that I often do in community and say a lot of the responsibility falls on us. To start to cultivate and be able to respond, knowing that our historical trauma is going to always surface. I know mine does every day. And what do you do when that happens? And how do you begin to build networks within your networks of folks who are making this their focus, right? I think about the parks, for instance. I'm a big user of Minneapolis parks, lots of different parks, and I was able to see the stark contrast when we talk about equity and the amenities that were offered in parks in other parts of the city versus North Minneapolis. This is an opportunity to change that. When I think about the National Park Service, right, and I heard some rumors, I don't know how true it is, that they didn't want our park to no longer be designated as a national park. So there are these I don't know if it's true. Is it true, Eric? It's not true. All right. See, I don't want to just spread rumors, but this is what happens, right? So when we're ill-informed, we fill in the gaps, right? And oftentimes it's with misinformation. Right. And so how can we continue to use platforms like your show, Mr. McFarland, and your paper, and these learning tables, and those cafe conversations, and those barbershop conversations, and I'm in the liquor store talking to folks about this, wherever people are gathering, saying, think about your business idea, think about what the needs are, and let's figure out how to tap into the existing resources to help you do that. We are a resource-rich city. We are a resource-rich state. The issue is the allocation of those resources aren't always done in an equitable way, and this is an opportunity for us to change that.
I'm Al McFarland. This is the Front Room Conversation at the Marcus Garvey House in North Minneapolis. The Marcus Garvey House is the home of Insight News, and today my guests are Devon Nolan, who is with the Pillsbury United Communities Organization. She's Community Engagement Coordinator, and Eric Hansen, Director of Economic Policy and Development for the City of Minneapolis, the Planning and Economic Development Department. Our theme, our conversation today, is about the development of the Upper Harbor Terminal. And specifically, we're here to talk about and to invite you to show up and add your voice to the development of this project. You can do that by attending the upcoming Community Engagement Learning Table. This is number 6 in a series. The Community Engagement Learning Table takes place on next Wednesday, December 18th, 2019, 4 to 8 p.m. at North Point Conference Center, corner of Plymouth and Penn, 1256 Penn Avenue North. That's inside the North Point Health Center headquarters there. And easy parking, easy to get to, and rich conversation, a chance to state your point of view, learn from neighbors, learn from stakeholders, businesses, agencies, organizations, residents, neighbors, neighborhood organizations, about the vision of creating opportunity in the development of the Upper Harbor Terminal. Eric has said this project is a project that's going to run somewhere in terms of cost in the 200 to 300,000, $200 million, upwards of $200 million,
Yes.
like I said, I think. And that means it's a significant development.
That's right.
The major players in the project right now, you mentioned, Eric, were the United Properties, that's the big developer, that's the Polak family. Also, First Avenue, owners of that storied venue in downtown Minneapolis, they are partnering to create the music venue idea to develop that. And you mentioned Thor.
Right.
Things have changed there somewhat, I believe.
Yeah.
You might give us an update. But before that, I want to invite our viewers to, if you like this conversation, like it and share it. Let people know. We are presenting this to you on a multi-platform strategy. So you might be connecting with us on Facebook Live, you might be connecting on Twitter or on YouTube, and we're developing our capacity to reach you across several platforms. And you should be able to engage with us as well. So our producers are monitoring the program on their iPads, and if there are questions coming up, they might be able to pass those on to me. Eric, if you would, take a minute to talk about schedule and to wrap this up by letting people know what the timeline is, where we are now, and when will we see a rock or blues or jazz concert and be able to raise the windows in our apartment, our house, and take a walk and buy some food in the neighborhood and go to work and do business there.
Before I answer that question, give me some latitude to talk about businesses.
Absolutely,
Okay.
please do, yeah.
So to kind of piggyback on what Devon has said, it's very important to have an expectation in this community of the assets that we have. This is not a deficit community. So when we hear about the wealth that's in the city and the region, there's also a lot of wealth in North Minneapolis. And not only the job opportunities that will be at Upper Harbor, but the subcontracting opportunities. These are roads that we're building. These are housing units we're building. These are commercial buildings that we're building. There's going to be multiple opportunities for subcontracting through this process. But inside those commercial business locations, we want to see homegrown development or homegrown companies. And one of the things that the city council and mayor have done for us from a staff perspective is given us approval of the strategic and racial equity action plan. And in the economic development realm, we are required to grow the number of BIPOC businesses in Minneapolis, and not only grow the number of businesses, but grow the number of businesses that are open in 5 years. And that's given us the opportunity to realign some of our programs citywide, and we'll be starting to announce some of those things in the coming year through the city council process. We just did a review of all of those programs to see how well we're doing and where we could do better around ownership and wealth building and support of small businesses through our business technical assistance program. And there's a number of entities on the north side, but throughout the city, that help develop and deploy those resources. So there's a lot of opportunity, and like Devon said, this is definitely the time to step up if you have interest in participating in this project, or if you have interest in growing your business in Minneapolis, we're here for you.
Here's a comment that sort of validates or seconds what you just said.
So that's Sean Pierce.
Sean Pierce
Yeah.
from the mayor's office says, and thank you for monitoring, Sean, the voice that the Collaborative Planning Committee brings is also powerful because they're bringing specificity to the how we deliver on the commitment to embed economic inclusion and justice to North Minneapolis. They have the solutions and the learning tables and the CPC, and these are all about listening and implementing the community wisdom that has been ignored for too long. Sean, thank you for that comment, and thank you for monitoring. Thank you for the mayor's office and its leadership in this. So go ahead.
Yeah, the mayor and specifically Sean have been really supportive of this, and they want to see the results. And what I would say is continue to hold us accountable for that, because my experience is talk is cheap in this business, especially when it comes from a guy from the city. It doesn't matter until there's results. So until we're done, we're all in it together, and you got to hold us accountable just as much as we expect to get this done. So as far as timeline is concerned, We have some financing from the state to help build those initial roads and streets and sewers, et cetera. And we have a time limit in which to spend it. And that timeline is to have the spending start by 2022, which is just a few years from now. So we are moving forward with some of the design work in this coordinated plan, which is the next step. But we will be moving in 2020, which is, again, only a few weeks away, to the designing. Because to get to that road, you got to do a lot of work, a lot of pre-work. So we'll be doing that to make sure we get there. And I always talk about it. People say, well, it's just that's just a timeline. And, it's just arbitrary date. And what's important from my perspective, I'll just speak on behalf of me and my role here, is this is a credibility time. There are too many times where we'll have something happen, especially in this community, where we'll say, oh, well, it's the north side, what did you expect? And I expect greatness, and I expect that impact, and I expect that the current conditions at the Upper Harbor are not acceptable to the community, they're not acceptable to me. And so that's kind of the bellwether. People are easy to jump off the bandwagon when there's an opportunity, and so I'm mindful of that. But I'm also mindful of the opportunity we have to provide housing units for Northsiders. And to Sean's comment, the CPC and the greater community is holding us accountable. We spent a lot of time talking about who is this for, right? And who is this for is really important, because the buildings can look all, we can make a building look great no matter what, but if it's not for the people we want it to be for, we missed the opportunity, we missed that equitable development. And so when we talk about that, we look at the north side, and if the north side has an area median income, which is a big and important indicator and measure in the housing world, if that's half the region, and we are setting the rents for somebody who makes 60% of the region, that's more expensive than most Northsiders. So how are we being intentional about the specifics around the housing to make sure that they are at rents that people here now can afford?
Sustainable.
And then what are we doing about making sure there's a preference for people that live on the north side to live at this project, or businesses that are on the north side to occupy the business space here, and not only just say it like you and I, the three of us talking on Facebook, but put it in operational contracts. And there's this community benefits agreement, which is a developer and community contract. I work on the redevelopment contract side, where we want to codify this in a contract that we could go to court if it's not being run. And we have a developer that's open to these concepts around community ownership, around long-term land leases, around preference policies. And so we're being very mindful of that. So those are the things that are happening right now. So between now and the next, let's say, quarter of the year, we'll be doing a lot of work around that. And the committee has been awesome, to be honest with you, about being forward. That's the great thing about North Minneapolis. That's not Minnesota, is directness, and we appreciate that. I'm a direct person about what we want to see and who we want this to benefit for, and how do we get there. And then very
option with a list of the community benefits that we expect to achieve, and then vet that and engage with the community around that, and then bring it to the city council for approval. And then that doesn't end where we are. That just sets here's what we think we're going to build on this parcel and this place, and here's the time frame, and these are the benefits we want to get to, and then we will move to doing some of those projects. And it's going to take a number of years, maybe even a decade and a half before this is fully built out. And then there's there's just a ton of resources that are at the table now from the community that are bringing their expertise around, here's something I want us to try because I've done it before. And that, I think, is something that we've all known that it's out there, but a lot of people are like surprised, because we talk about North Minneapolis and the deficit way so much that when people come in and find it, they're amazed by the talent that's in this community, and I've seen it for the last 20 years, and I'm just excited that we're getting there.
I want to thank both of you for taking time today. I want to tell our viewers that this conversation continues actually next Tuesday. This team will be my guest on the radio broadcast of Conversations with Al McFarland, which airs live from KFAI 90.3 FM in Minneapolis at 1 o'clock, 1 to 2 Tuesday. So we'll cover some of the same things, but go deeper on some other things. And this is a conversation that I think I intend to keep having for the next several years, so much so that we've assigned one of our writers, Randall Bradley, an architect, to cover the Upper Harbor Terminal. So he's been attending the learning table meetings and writing stories about it, but he'll be talking to all of the stakeholders over a period of time, explaining from their point of view and from the point of view of a resident and from the point of view of an architect, what this means for the building of our community and where our interests lie. Devon, let me have you close this session by inviting people to the event next Wednesday.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having it. Hopefully you'll have us back.
Yes,
We
absolutely.
behaved ourselves. So the learning table, December 18th, this will be our 6th learning table. And, we talk about the fact that it's from 4 to 8, but don't feel obligated to stay for the entire time. I know we all have lives. It's a Wednesday, evening. But come and participate in whatever way you're comfortable. This will be an opportunity to talk specifically about some of the design for land uses and community benefits. So as I said before, how do we embed community benefits in each of the land uses for parks, for the music venue, for housing? And, I encourage you to come out December 18th at the North Point Conference Center, 1256 Penn. And if you can't make it, share this with someone who you think might be interested. If you can't make it, I feel obligated to share this with someone who you know might not know about it. We tend to spend a lot of time talking about, these so-called Hollywood stars and their lives, and that's a topic of conversation. There's a few things that are hot right now, but I think it behooves us to have a little bit of a shift. And I'm the politicized friend, Mr. McFarland. You've never been in that situation, so nobody wanted anything to do with politics for a long time. And when Obama ran the first time, I started paying attention. Prior to that, I grew up in a under the thinking that was someone else's job to do that. We have a president for that. We have a mayor for that. But through the guidance of Elder Michael Chaney, right, who was the ultimate freedom fighter, taught me that we can go to the legislator, we can go to our city council, and we can make demands. And so he lit a fire. And I have made it my business to light as many other fires in folks as I can. You can't just have that one politicized friend. Right. There's power in numbers. And even if you don't fully understand what's happening, your presence is what makes all the difference. Oftentimes, the people who have what I would say disposable income and time are the folks who get to participate in things like this. We've done our best to try to make it accessible to the community, but we're also very cognizant that we're asking you to come to us. We've thought strategically about how to, once the weather breaks, because it's hard to do anything when it's so cold, to think strategically about how to, I've been doing community engagement for a long time, get to the people, bring the work to the people. This is something that it's not new to us. But more importantly, one of the big takeaways for me after listening to the community, after listening to the subject matter expert that we've flown in from Chicago and Oakland and Omaha, right, where we have examples of where this has worked in other communities, that the community ownership piece is paramount. The way I talk about it in community is that we must become the landlord for the city. We must become the landlord for the parks. And the only thing that is, you want me to be your boss? The only thing that is not replicable is the land. The building that's built on the land can be torn down and something else can be built there, but the land is what we cannot replicate. And so how do we challenge ourselves to become subject matter experts on these things. You know, there are, again, resources out here to help us do that. There's some initiatives that I've been pushed into doing, that I've been thinking about doing, that now is the time to really figure out how do we capture all the wealth that exists in North Minneapolis. We have a tremendous amount of buying and spending power, but a lot of that is leaking out of our communities because we don't have the amenities that we need here. We don't capture it. And so rather than continue to talk about the conditions and how we got to these conditions, we need to be strategic and focused in outlining some pathways out of this. And that's what this is.
There we go. Listen, show up Wednesday, 4 to 8 p.m. at the North Point Conference Center for Learning Table, Community Engagement number 6 Learning Table for the Upper Harbor Terminal. I'm Al McFarland. Thank you for being a part of this, and thanks to my guest, Eric Hansen, Director of Economic Policy and Development for the City of Minneapolis Planning and Economic Development Department, and Devon Nolan, Community Engagement Coordinator for Pillsbury United Communities. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
All right,
Okay.
good.